wow. Okay. To the gentleman from Arizona for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Though that was an interesting question. Mr. Silvers, forgive me for not jotting these down. Who are the folks that you speak for?
The AFL-CIO, the Consumer Federation of America, and the Americans for Financial Reform, which is a large coalition of more than 250 organizations. The members of Americans for Financial Reform are in my written testimony.
Okay. Mr. Silvers, is it typical for those groups to take a position opposing a bill without reading it?
Excuse me?
Is it typical for those organizations to take a position on a bill without reading it?
I can tell we're going to have a dispute as to what the bill says. Why don't we come to it?
Mr. Silvers, can you grab for me the nice little bill in regards to the $50 million capital formation?
Just a moment. What did I do with the bills? Did I do the bills? Sorry, I brought the bill text with me.
Small Company Capital Formation Act.
Okay.
HR 1070.
Okay.
You got it?
Not yet, but that's okay. Why don't you read this for the provision?
Well, no, I was going to actually take you to page 3, line 6. You made a rather bold statement that how sinful and evil this was because of the lack of audited financials. But, and I know literacy may be a problem around here, requiring the issuer to file audited financial statements with the Commission and distribute such statements to prospective investors. What are we missing here, Mr. Silver?
When we reviewed the bill gave that as an option to the SEC. If you've since changed it to make it mandatory, then I would suggest that that's an improvement, and I congratulate you for it. But when we looked at it, it was voluntary. Well, it wasn't voluntary. It was an option the SEC could choose to impose.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Silver, it was always this way in our workup, but I appreciate you being willing to play. Mr. Chairman, is it Wheels? Wheel. Could you actually share with me, because you and I have already had some conversations, both the good and the bad you think would come from changing the Rule A amounts?
Well,
or the Reg A amounts?
Well, first of all, the bill, the way it's currently crafted, has some, I would call it an enhanced Regulation A, not only in terms of size, but in terms of investor protection, so I applaud the committee on that. It allows us to access capital, corporations, small corporations, more cost effectively and avoid the train wrecks that they typically have in the market by not being able to test the waters. And so that is a great positive. Much more cost effectively because you don't have to add a lot of the exhibits that are typically associated with the prospectus of Formal S-1 that add up to quite a bit of cost and that very few people ever actually read in the marketplace.
Mr. Wield, share with me what you think the biggest threat to the markets if we do this is.
If we do this? I truly believe there are not big threats to the market. To put it into context, when WorldCom filed for bankruptcy, it had $100 billion in assets, and that represents 2,000 $50 million transactions, which in today's terms would be increasing the size of the listed market by 40%. So essentially by strangling small companies and entrepreneurship, by not allowing them cost-effective access to capital, we really dampen the economy, job formation, and exactly, I would say, the constituency that Mr. Silvers represents.
All right, Mr. Wield, as you may know, I have a compulsion about making graphs and charts. It's a problem in the statistical background. Up on the screen, actually go back one, please. You'll notice the lines, and one thing I found fascinating is it looks like over the last decade or so, we've actually had a shrinkage of U.S. listings, while you see our competitors somewhat of an explosion by some of them. What's your understanding of what's happened to the number of traded equities?
We have lost from the peak in 1997, which interestingly was before the crescendo in the bubble. we have lost 42% of listed companies from the United States listed equities markets, which by definition is pulling jobs out of the U.S. economy. And by contrast, other countries, including China, the one at the top of the chart there is China, but almost every other industrialized country in the world is net adding listed companies to their market.
Ms. Wield, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
And I thank the gentleman.